It's a proud privilege to be speaking before you today, and I'll try and keep my presentation and speech very brief. Normally, I don't speak more than 5 minutes. The rest 10 minutes are kept for your understanding of whatever I have spoken. And if you have some questions to further elaborate on any particular aspect, then I would love to do that. So basically, since morning, right from our chief guest onwards, we have heard the word called architecture several times. If I ask you a question that did you follow the word architecture? What exactly it means? Where it comes from? How it is conceptualized? How it is elaborated? What are the elements, indivisible elements of an architecture? What are the founding stones, foundational stones of an architecture? What are the building blocks? So there you can go on asking n number of questions about the word architecture. So I'm here to speak to you about architecture and basically been practicing enterprise architecture in my own profession, which I learned from the founder, the father of the field. The father of the field is John Jackman. In 1987, he gave a paper where he tried to present how to appreciate, how to understand a complex system. Not only understand the complex system, but how to build a complex system. And once you build the complex system, then whenever you face any anomalies of the system, then how to correct it, like how to be a doctor of an enterprise. So here, this picture before you is something which is making little sense from the subject matter that we have been talking about and the way it has been presented, that it is an enormous things. There are infinite number of factors which are in linkage with each other, become devastating, become dangerous, become adverse, and make us vulnerable to exploitation. That is what we have been talking. Though the word warfare, cyber warfare, is quite different than what is physical warfare, and you would appreciate that this word is not yet defined. We have been making efforts to define this word. All the experts together have been trying to understand exactly what we are trying to say with this word, warfare, what exactly it means. Is it an attack on sovereignty? If it is sovereignty, then what kind of sovereignty is this? Which are the sovereigns? Which are the limits and boundary, as was discussed in the previous panel also? So how do you define the cyber boundary? So, well, different people have different definitions of cyber boundary and cyber sovereignty, and the fundamental things about which will tell you that you are at war with somebody else in the cyber world. Because it's all connected world, one world, connected technology. We are using something which others are also using. Our data are lying somewhere, we don't know where they are. So there are a lot of complicated factors are there, and gives you an idea about the complexity that we may encounter in the field of cyber, and what we presume or we perceive or we anticipate or we believe to be our own. If that is under threat, then we loosely say that our country or our nation, our assets, our infra, our internet, our all the details is under attack, and we are at war. So because it is done digitally, so we call it cyber war. So this is how loosely it is defined, but broadly it gives you an idea that this is a complicated thing. Like how do we, now the next question is, how do we understand complications? Now, the whole picture I have put in your brain, and then you see that how confused a person can get, or how confused a system can get. These are these dots which you see there. These are the variables which are used against a system which is owned by you or your country. Then you find that they create complications. So when there are variables they interact with each other, they produce a result which is more than the sum of the two variables. They impact. They lend complexity to your system. So then, brief word, I've tried to explain that what complexity in the briefest manner that we can understand. When the various variables which impact you adversely, they interact with each other, the overall impact is far greater than the sum of the variables. Now, similarly in cyber warfare also, complexity creeps in because the various systems are there, various mechanisms are there, various tools are there, various stakeholders are there, and these are variables. When they all come together, they make your system very, very complicated. So the challenges before any agency like we have critical infrastructure protection system, we have non-critical cyber protection systems, then we have defense which has its own independent cyber system. So basically these three elements or these three dimensions of any country are supposed to be protected against any cyber attack or any cyber onslaught by the real or the perceived enemy. So then the next question is, which appears before us, is that how do we control and retaliate to cyber warfare? So once we have understood the complexity of the enormity of the whole system, then how do we control and retaliate? Or for both controlling as well as retaliation, you need to understand. To understand something, you need some concepts. To have the concepts, you need some classification of the concepts. When you have classified the concepts, then you need a framework of a concept. So do we have any framework of cyber warfare? Do we have, if I call architecture, a framework, alternatively we call it an architecture of cyber warfare. So do we have any architecture of cyber warfare? These are the fundamental questions that we need to ask ourselves. So when we have architecture, then we need to have elements. And when we have elements, they interact together, then they become components, and then they create subsystems. Then, as General Lamba mentioned, we need system of systems. So this is how you prepare your system of systems once you think of architecture. So we have a concept called enterprise architecture. It's a field of knowledge which helps you understand complexity. And if you consider the cyber warfare is a complex system, then you need the enterprise architecture of cyber warfare or cyber system or cyber security. You can give any name. You'll be very happy to appreciate that United States of America is the only country which has the strongest cyber defense in the world. And they use enterprise architecture to build their cyber warfare defense system. Compared to US, where are we? I think a large number of us would not have even heard of enterprise architecture. But US is already using it. They're using it since the famous attack on the Twin Towers. They built their homeland security, integrated the 13 cyber missions in one enterprise. And they built the enterprise architecture of their cyber missions to address the issue. So what happens, not that we are not doing it, we are also doing it, as Director Defense, Ministry of Defense also explained, that systems are speaking to each other, agencies are speaking to each other. We are also doing it. But are we as organized as an enterprise would expect us or would like us to be prepared for which an example is already in the US. And they have enterprise architecture of not only the defensive, not only the offensive, but also the predictive models of cyber warfare. They can predict what kind of problems they are going to have as this technology is evolving, as the systems are developing. At the same time, their brain is working to build an enterprise for a predictive situation which may arise in due course of time. So that is the beauty of enterprise architecture. It prepares you to prepare a defensive model, an offensive model, as well as a predictive model. That's the beauty of enterprise architecture. And now I will take you to next slide, which essentially, I have tried to create two situations. And loosely speaking, I don't mean, I'm not serious about it. If you take scenario A, where most of the cyber attacks remain undetected, and if you have a situation B, where most of the cyber attacks are detected, what difference you find in these two columns? I put some question marks. So if we take the first block as something which we call strategy and goals, if we take the second block, we call it the processes, and the third block represents the design of the system, and fourth block represents the technology of the system, and the fifth one is the technical part of it, where you actually bring the strategy, planning, policy, processes, everything together. You stitch them together and prepare a system ready for deployment. So that's the fifth column, which is nothing but implementation system. And the last one is the operation, the final deployment of whatever your enterprise wants you to deploy as per the strategy, planning, design, technology, and the implementation aspect. So what difference we find here, that why we have problems in detecting cases, if we have question mark that we don't have our goals and strategy, we don't have our planning and processes in place, we have not understood them. If we have not understood the technology and not understood the specification part of it, then we don't end up detecting the case. On the contrary, if we have these things in place, we end up detecting the case. Very liberally, I applied the system in my police work. That helps me understand, as Mr. Manish was mentioning about the gap analysis part of it. So this is the difference when you deal with two systems, which are enterprise architecture oriented system and one which is not enterprise architecture